The symbolism of the frog. Both toads and frogs belong to the order Anura, but symbolically a frog is very different to a toad. Frogs account for around 88% of extant amphibian species. Water frog species tend to be called toads, but the distinction between frogs and toads is informal. Frogs tend to have long legs, longer than their head and body, which are made for hopping. Toads, on the other hand, have much shorter legs and prefer to crawl around rather than hop, and this is Mr. Toad from The Wind in the Willows. Frogs have smooth, somewhat slimy skin. Toads have dry, warty skin. But frogs have a special place in symbolism because of their strange life cycle. They start as eggs, hatch into tadpoles with gills and a tail. Then they lose that tail as they develop into adults with lungs and legs. So the transformation that takes place is as extraordinary as a butterfly's. But it is its mention in one ancient and very special hymn that tells us most about the symbolism, the Rig Veda. As such, the symbolism of the frog largely derives from its place in Hinduism, and by extension, Buddhism and Kabuki theatre. The Rig Veda, Rig Veda, is an ancient Indian collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns, suktas, and one of those hymns is the hymn to the frogs. The Rig Veda is the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit text, and its early layers are among the oldest extant texts in any Indo-European language. And the sounds and texts of the Rig Veda have been orally transmitted since the 2nd millennium BCE. But before we look at the text itself, we need a little background on some of the features of the frog that cause it to be used in these texts. The bulging eyes. Bulging eyes are a symbol of a person undergoing an intense spiritual experience. Nowhere is this better portrayed than in the Lewis chessmen. Discovered in 1831 on Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. The Lewis chessmen are a group of 12th century chess pieces, most of which are carved from walrus ivory. Today, 82 pieces are owned and usually exhibited by the British Museum in London, and the remaining 11 are at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. All of the chessmen are staring with bulging eyes, an indicator that what they were seeing was so extraordinary that they were rapt with wonder, and their eyes were popping out of their heads at the sight. And indeed, that is exactly what all frogs have. Huge, bulging eyes, nearly popping out of their head. Thus, frogs are symbolically associated with spiritual experience. But there is also added symbolism if the frog is found in a well, as a frog in a well means someone with a narrow vision of life. So not an experienced adept, an initiate, one in danger of thinking he knows it all. Alice in Wonderland and the Frog Footman. The use of frogs in the Rig Veda was known to Lewis Carroll, and he chose to incorporate a frog footman in Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. There might be some sense in your knocking, the footman went on, if we had the door between us. For instance, if you were inside, you might knock, and I could let you out, you know. He was looking up into the sky all the time he was speaking, and this Alice thought decidedly uncivil. But perhaps he can't help it, she said to herself. His eyes are so very nearly at the top of his head. But at any rate, he might answer questions. How am I to get in? She repeated aloud. But Alice is somewhat dismissive of the very laid-back Hindu approach the footman appears to have to her questions. I shall sit here, the footman remarked, till tomorrow. At this moment, the door of the house opened, and a large plate came skimming out, straight at the footman's head. It just grazed his nose and broke to pieces against one of the trees behind him. Or next day, maybe, the footman continued in the same tone, exactly as if nothing had happened. How am I to get in? Asked Alice again, in a louder tone. Are you to get in at all? Said the footman. That's the first question, you know. It was, no doubt, only Alice did not like to be told so. But at the beginning of this chapter, Pig and Pepper, we are given a huge clue by Carroll that the footman is no fool. Suddenly a footman in livery came running out of the wood. She considered him to be a footman because he was in livery. Otherwise, judging by his face only, she would have called him a fish, and rapped loudly at the door with his knuckles. Fish have great symbolic meaning, which we explore in our video, The Symbolism of Fish. The story continues. It was opened by another footman in livery, with a round face and large eyes like a frog, and both footmen, Alice noticed, had powdered hair that curled all over their heads. The wig and powdered hair are symbols of wool, powerful symbolic energy, which we explore in our video, The Symbolism of Sheep and Wool. And after an exchange of messages, Carroll could not resist adding the sentence, then they both bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. And thus you have entanglement, explained in brief, intertwining of spiritual energy and exchange of wisdom in the form of messages. So Lewis Carroll knew full well what a frog represented, and couldn't resist adding that entanglement is the key to the invisible dissemination of wisdom. But where does the Rig Veda fit into all this? The significance of Asrama. Asrama is a system of stages of life discussed in Hindu texts of the ancient and medieval eras. The four asramas are Brahmacharya, a student, Grihastha, a householder, Vanaprastha, a forest walker or forest dweller, and Sannyasa, renunciate. Brahmacharya represents the bachelor student stage of life. This stage focuses on education. The student went to a gurukul, family, clan of the guru, and typically would live with a guru, mentor, acquiring knowledge of science, philosophy, scriptures and logic. He would practice celibacy and self-discipline, working to earn dakshina paid to the guru, and learning to live a life of dharma, righteousness, morals and duties. And frogs are students at the Brahmacharya stage. Upanayana Samavatana. Upanayana marks the acceptance of a student by a preceptor, such as a guru or acharya, and an individual's initiation into a school in Hinduism. It signifies the start of a new and disciplined life as a brahmacharya. The Upanayana ceremony is arguably the most important rite for the Brahmin male. The Samavatana is a rite of passage in the ancient texts of Hinduism, performed at the close of the Brahmacharya period and marks the graduation of the student. This rite of passage includes a ceremonial bath. Parjanya. Before we piece all these symbolic pieces of the jigsaw together, we also need to know who Parjanya was, as he is mentioned in the text that brings all these pieces together. Parjanya, according to the Vedas, is a deity of rain, thunder, lightning, and the one who fertilizes the earth. Parjanya is another epithet of Indra, the Vedic deity of the sky and heaven. He is sometimes considered as a rain bull controlled by the superior Indra. The thunder is his roar. The following text, written about the same time as the Upanishads, shows that clouds are symbolically the rain cows. In essence, rain cows or clouds are milked of their rain. Supa Nakayana 3. The conjuring of a storm. Shout, thunder, reach the clouds. These waters of thine shall be level with the mountain tops. The winds shall milk the cloud, a cow whose trail drips with milk. The wild beast shall come seeking firm land. Symbolically, the flashes of lightning are the teats of the rain cow, and so we have an important link with the monsoon in India and everything it meant to Indian society. It transformed, it rejuvenated, it provided life to a parched and barren earth. And we have a video, the symbolism of rain, which explains why rain is such an important symbol. The explanation so far. So far we have a number of children and adolescents at the Brahmacharya stage of the Hindu asrama. They have been closeted away with their gurus, have remained celibate and self-disciplined, have denied themselves any number of pleasures, such as alcohol, have had to consume lots of dry texts, and it has been almost as though they were buried or trapped in a bubble, denied any form of life. And then comes the point where they graduate, a rite of passage that includes a ceremonial bath, water, rain, and this is the point where they become symbolic frogs. Noisy, excited, and free to enjoy the pleasures of the householder stage. And they are called frogs because they behave like Indian frogs do, when the monsoon arrives, free from celibacy and free from the restrictions of the student stage. Professor Harold Bender, Princeton University, on the naturalistic background of the frog hymn, Rig Veda 7.103. In India, as in other tropical countries, frogs estivate during the dry season. That is, they bury themselves deep in the sand or soil and silently await the coming of the rains. They emerge by the thousands from their places of estivation at the beginning of the rainy season. They breed when they thus emerge in the tropical spring from their retreats. They croak chiefly during the breeding season, the croak being the sexual cry of the male. When a large number of individuals join in the performance, as is usually the case, the concert at the beginning of the rains is simply deafening and is audible miles away. And so we are now ready to pull all these pieces of the jigsaw together and examine the frog hymn. Rig Veda, translated by Ralph Griffith, 1896, hymn C3, Frogs. They who lay quiet for a year, the Brahmins who fulfill their vows, the frogs have lifted up their voice, the voice Parjanya hath inspired. What time on these, as on a dry skin lying in the pool's bed, the floods of heaven descended, the music of the frogs comes forth in concert, like the cows lowing with their calves beside them. When at the coming of the rains the water has poured upon them, as they yearned and thirsted, one seeks another as he talks, and greets him with cries of pleasure as a son his father. Each of these twain receives the other kindly, while they are revelling in the flow of waters. When the frog, moistened by the rain, springs forward, and green and spotty both combine their voices, when one of these repeats the other's language as he who learns the lesson of the teacher, your every limb seems to be growing larger as ye converse with eloquence on the waters. One is cow bellow and goat bleat the other. One frog is green and one of them is spotty. They bear one common name, and yet they vary, and talking modulate the voice diversely. As Brahmins sitting round a brimful vessel talk at the soma rite of Atiratra, so frogs ye gather round the pool to honour this day of all the year, the first of rain time. These Brahmins with the soma juice perform their year-long rite, have lifted up their voices, and these Adhvaryus, sweating with their kettles, come forth and show themselves, and none are hidden. They keep the 12 months God-appointed order, and never do the men neglect the season. Soon as the rain time in the year returneth, those who were heated kettles gain their freedom. Cow bellow and goat bleat have granted riches, and green and spotty have vouchsafed us treasure. The frogs, who give us cows in hundreds, lengthen our lives in this most fertilizing season. A hymn becomes a spell. One of the most fascinating aspects of this hymn, in praise of all the students who are transformed to become adepts, and who celebrated by croaking their joy and comparing notes with each other, testing out their newfound release from celibacy, is that it and the later Supanakhyana later became spells, designed to literally bring on the monsoon. Instead of a frog being taken as a symbol of a Brahmin, qualified enough to go out and practice all he had learnt to enrich the world with his knowledge, the prayer's meaning was entirely literalized. Indeed, Professor Harold Bender said, if the Vedic Indians observed that the coming of the rains was preceded by the croaking of frogs, or even if the croaking and the rains were simultaneous, it would have been natural, yea, inevitable, for them to conclude that the frogs were responsible for the breaking of the rains. There is, in fact, more than a bit of native evidence that the Hindus viewed the frogs as rain callers and sacrificed them, and still do. And this may be why the Hindustan Times, in an article by Ramesh Babu, reported that 80% of India's frogs are facing extinction. A tragedy indeed, as the frog is the main predator of mosquitoes.